Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of FRS Recruitment's Ireland is Hiring webinar series. My name is Derek Pearl, and I'm the Head of Business Development with FRS. So over the next 40 minutes, we'll provide expats and those of you making relocation plans to Ireland with information on the social welfare structures and resources available on returning to Ireland. That will include welfare eligibility, medical cards, schooling, social housing, and other allowances. And we'll also discuss visas and work eligibility for partners. So the partners or spouses of expats returning to Ireland who are non-Irish nationals, what the challenges are there and how we overcome those. And I just want to mention as well, please note that this webinar is being recorded and will live stream on social media channels such as LinkedIn and YouTube. Okay, so I'm delighted to be joined today by our expert guest speakers. We have Danielle McLaughlin, who is the Irish Abroad Networking Officer for an organisation called Crosscare Migrant Project, and her colleague Richard King, who is the project leader at Crosscare. So what Danielle will do is she'll discuss social welfare structures, and Richard will talk to us really about the eligibility requirements for non-Irish national partners making the move. So Danielle and Richard, you're both very welcome, and thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thanks. Yeah, delighted to be here.
Good. Okay, so listen, just before we start the Q&A with both Danielle and Richard, I just wanted to give you maybe a kind of a 2-minute overview on the Ireland is Hiring campaign, because we've done a number of episodes and some people might be joining us for the first time. So it started back in November 2018 when FRS Recruitment flew a team of recruiters over to Australia. There were major Irish expat events going on there, including GAA matches, which we sponsored, festivals, concerts, and a number of events bringing Irish people together. And we went there to promote the volume of jobs that were with our client base back in Ireland. And I suppose the people that we met were blown away at the fact that we actually sent a team down to Australia to bring people home, and even more surprised when we offered to pay for flights for free for anybody that we placed for a permanent job. So the Ireland is Hiring campaign was a big success, and we wanted to make it a bigger piece for our organisation. So we're very proud and very lucky to have been given a sponsorship opportunity with the GAA, and we've decided to sponsor the GAA Go app, which effectively live streams all of the hurling and football matches to expats all around the world. And that GAA Go app gets typically about 1 million views per year. So I suppose it's a big part for us in terms of reaching out to those expats and educating them on what's going on in Ireland and helping them not just, I suppose, on the recruitment process, but also on all of the support structures for when you relocate home, such as the episode today focusing on welfare and visas. And we're going to continue as well as a sweetener to pay for flights for free for expats that we place into permanent jobs back here. Worth mentioning as well, we have done a couple of episodes back on, I suppose, the job market, and we can share that link with you to have a look at afterwards. But just as a quick overview, I suppose we're in challenging times, but there's still a major skills gap across Ireland, particularly in, I suppose, high tech, healthcare, and more senior roles. So we have, of course, big demand for IT, engineering, pharma, science, and healthcare professionals in Ireland. And the HSE alone have only announced in the last week they're going to take on an extra 12,500 healthcare workers over the next year and a half. So there are, I suppose, certain sectors of the economy here that it's still very difficult to find people for. And, we welcome people to have a look at our website and have a look at those type of opportunities. And finally, one more thing worth mentioning is, I suppose, for any expats that emigrated from rural parts of Ireland and mightn't have had opportunities in, let's say, Kerry or the Northwest, in certain areas where they might have been a fair distance from a large city like Dublin. There's a huge amount more remote working opportunities for big multinationals and big companies that are based in Dublin that are long-term job offerings with a view to an expat returning home, working from home maybe in the likes of Kerry, and then commuting maybe once every 2 weeks for a day in the Dublin office post this COVID crisis. So a lot of new opportunities have come out of this particular scenario. Okay, and as I said, you can have a look at our previous webinars and we can do a lot more detail on those type of opportunities. So to our viewers, I just want to point out there's a chat function, there's an ask a question function on the bottom of your screen. So please feel free to say hello today. You're very welcome. You can ask us any questions that you have throughout the next 45 minutes. And some we'll address today and others we'll get to a little bit later. So that's my spiel. I want to hand you over now to Danielle. And the first question that I have for you, Danielle, is can you tell us a little bit about the Crosscare Migrant Project and what exactly you do?
Okay, so Crosscare Migrant Project is part of a larger organisation of Crosscare, and it's based in Dublin as the social agency of the Dublin Archdiocese. The Crosscare Migrant Project itself was set up in 1987 as Immigrant advice, and we are funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So we provide information and support for Irish citizens who are making decisions around planning to emigrate abroad or who are living abroad and returning to Ireland. And then we also provide some advocacy one-on-one direct support for people who've recently returned to Ireland and are experiencing more crisis, vulnerable situations. We run a website, migrantproject.ie, which has a lot of up-to-date details on the options around leaving and returning, what information that's important for you to know, particularly focused around access to welfare and state supports, housing, education, medical cards and things like that, and then various information around access to immigration, visas and permissions for partners. We publish some publications, and we have, probably for the participants' interest, today we have an Immigrant News newsletter which you can sign up for on our website as well. So you get some updates quite regularly as to situations here and abroad and opportunities. We also provide some training and information sharing. This is mainly to organisations abroad who support Irish immigrants, and we ensure kind of good quality, good practice information is shared. We network and collaborate with organisations where we can, and finally we work with policy issues. So we do some research reports and work to address gaps in policy areas where people are experiencing difficulties in returning to Ireland. So we published a few policy reports and do some lobbying around improving and making some change there as well.
Busy days, so, and in fairness, that's a fantastic service to offer. So and it's being a charity as well, it's free for anybody to engage and to get this information from you.
It is, yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks for that, Danielle. So just, I suppose, to get this started, how does someone go about setting up in Ireland before they actually even find work?
Okay, so people on this call are doing the first important step, particularly for professionals. If you're looking to enter the employment market in Ireland, first step is to do that research before you make your decision to move to Ireland. Before you book anything, get the research done. There are some supports if you are returning to Ireland and haven't quite secured a job yet, and you're still in the process and you're interviewing, things like that. There are lots of supports out there. There is jobsireland.ie, which is the government website to provide some support. It's a public employment service, and that in that you can find lots of supports. Very simple things like improving your CV and preparing for interviews, or access to training, upskilling, education supports that you can access. And in terms of financial support, first things first, have your savings. It's still expensive to live in Ireland. So no matter what your situation is, you want to be prepared with probably a few months worth of wages, just to get through the first few months, because things can be a little bit uncertain. Access to accommodation can be quite difficult. It hasn't been so difficult during the pandemic because a lot of Airbnb has freed up. The rent rates are still high, so particularly in Dublin. So we'd still advise people to really do the research. Look at the common websites would be daft.ie, let.ie, rent.ie. And if you're in a situation where you do need some financial support and you're worried that your savings won't last too long, you are entitled to apply for social welfare supports such as job seekers allowance, job seekers benefit, and I won't go into too much detail on those, but the job seekers benefit would be a contributory based payment. So this is often based on your pay-related social insurance contributions, your PRSI contributions, within the relevant tax year. So for this year, for example, you're talking about 2018, and depending on your contributions and your role, your employment type, there'll be certain different categories in how that will be assessed. So the other option then is job seekers allowance. If you haven't developed PRSI contributions over the last few years in Ireland, it is an option to apply for job seekers allowance, and this will be based on your means. So your means and your habitual residence. So this is an important element to access to payments for anyone returning to Ireland, that you need to prove that you're returning to resume your residence in Ireland. So you need to have some documents that will show that, for example, your end of employment abroad, your end of lease, that you have a bank account open in Ireland, that you're re-establishing your life in Ireland. So it won't be available to people who are just visiting or coming back temporarily. And it can take a while. Some of the payments, there's been backlogs. So I guess some people will be making the decision to come soon. Others may be thinking next year. So the whole situation could be different. So it's kind of hard to say at the moment around processing times, but there is a bit of a backlog at the moment, just to make people aware of that. But first things first really is to apply for a PPS if you don't have one already. And you can go on to mygov.ie is the state website that has all of the departments' websites and information online. So the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection will be where you go for any information around access to social welfare payments. And if you had a PPS before and you're not sure where it is, or if you haven't got it, you can get in contact with the Client Identity Services. They can retrieve your old PPS. Now, you'll need a PPS to access most state services in Ireland, so that's an important first step. But there's a lot of information on our website, on Returning to Ireland section. There's a lot of information on the Citizens Information .ie website, and the government website gov.ie, and certainly if anybody's having any difficulties or any more detailed questions, they can certainly get in touch with us and we can direct them in the right way. Other areas to think about will be your public services card, and that can be the next step when you get to Ireland. It's not something you can really sort out before you get here. Normally people would make an application online for job seekers, but there has been difficulties just with accessing that if you don't have a public services card, in our experience. So this just may be best approached when you're returning to Ireland. And previously you would have been able to arrange an appointment to get a new PPS if you haven't had one before, or your children need one. Unfortunately, that facility is not available right now, but we're talking about COVID pandemic time, and this could change soon. We know some of the services are coming back online again, and they're getting back into the offices. They're making appointments only. But we could see some change in that. Previously, you would have been able to make an appointment up to 6 weeks before you return, but you do have to present in person for that appointment. Now you can apply by post or email, but you need to be applying from Ireland. So those are the first steps. And if there's any further details that you need around that's not on our website, do get in touch.
Okay. And for people who are a long time out of Ireland, can they apply for social welfare when they come back? Is there a cut-off time, an amount of years where they haven't paid, let's say, any social insurance, that they can actually get some form of social welfare, if not for themselves if they're coming into a job, but for their family or their partner?
Yeah, so if you have PRSI contributions from 2018, over the last 4 years, you need to have a certain amount of contributions, such as 39. There's a few ways they work it out, so it's best to check the website on that, and to get in contact with the local Intrio office in the county that you're returning to, or the area you're returning to. But you can access a job seekers allowance payment if you haven't got any contributions. You just need to show you're habitually resident in Ireland again, that you're staying long term, and that your means are low. So it'll be assessed on your means. There is a little, maybe not confusion, but there was some uncertainty about the Ireland had introduced a COVID pandemic unemployment payment during the pandemic, and that's still ongoing. But it was only made available to people who became redundant in Ireland. So it wasn't accessible by people returning, but you will go through the normal process of applying for job seekers allowance. The other important piece of information that people will want to know about is the access to child benefit. Child benefit is a universal payment, and it's available to all parents in Ireland. Again, that will be assessed on habitual residence condition, but it's not based on your income, so you have every entitlement to apply for that.
Okay, great. And that's 140 per child, isn't it?
Just double check that. I think that's about 106 a month, but you'll have different rates based on number of children as well.
Gotcha. Okay. And I know it's difficult at the moment with, I suppose, in the COVID crisis with, I suppose, some public services and time frames, but would it be realistic to say that somebody who would move over could probably within 2 to 3 months be set up in social welfare in terms of getting some payments, child welfare payments and allowances, let's say wage allowance, from arriving in the country within 2 or 3 months? Is that a realistic time frame?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, it's there are backlogs, and there is a lot of pressure on the department at the moment, the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection. So to be realistic, there could be some delay. The best way to approach that is to have all of the documents that you'll need in advance. So, you know, if there's any consideration that you will need to access these payments, just make sure you have some documents to kind of prove that you've left the country that you're living in to stay long term in Ireland. So, you know, some bills, some end of lease, end of employment, your one-way return flight to Ireland, things like that. You know, evidence that if you do have a property, it can be means assessed, but there are a lot of it won't be, you know, it won't be included in the assessment. So, you know, there's worry that if you do have a property either abroad or in Ireland that you won't be entitled to anything. That's not the case. They'll just assess it on a certain level. And you know, if you're returning to live in a property that you own, you won't be assessed on that means. And then, you know, it can also include a dependent adult, as you said, if you're applying for a dependent adult. It all comes down to your income. So, you know, you will be paid the job seekers benefit if you have the contributions up to between 6 and 9 months. But the job seekers allowance is really indefinite until you find employment. And you know, there isn't a limit on that, but you will have a fixed amount, and your spouse or your partner, your combined income will be assessed, and then there'll be additional qualified children payments with that primary payment. Your primary payment would be job seekers allowance. So child benefit is additional to that.
Yeah, it's a very strong support structure overall, actually, for people who do find it difficult when they come home, if they're not coming into good jobs. I suppose our audience today, and a lot of the people who tuned in are expats, and many of them are professionals with good careers abroad and are looking at the market here to find out will they get a career just as good. And I suppose we can talk to them in FRS about that. afterwards. So can I just paint a picture that if you have, let's say, a professional coming over, an accountant, an engineer, a doctor, a nurse, whoever it might be, they arrive in Ireland, they're on a very good salary, and they bring a spouse or a partner, maybe a couple of children with them as well. Typically, obviously, they're going to be means tested, but if the salary was below a certain grade, there'd still be some form of social welfare support for the partner, and obviously the kids then get the child benefit regardless in terms of that contribution. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, that's right. Again, it's all based on combined means, and then there are caps. Is probably the best way to say it, as to how much they assess as means. So, your full salary won't be assessed as means. So you get to a certain amount, but it can be quite complicated if you're trying to explain. But there's lots of examples on the department's website. If you're earning and your partner isn't, and how you can calculate that. So there are some tools that will help you work that out.
Okay, great. I think we'll share some of those web links afterwards as well. We send out an e-sign after each of our episodes too, within a matter of days. So we can include, I suppose, some links that people can connect to. Because we mentioned a little bit earlier, it's a very complex system, and trying to get as much information across in the next 45 minutes as possible is a difficult task, and we will have to redirect people at different times and with different queries to other websites. What we're trying to do is, I suppose, we're trying to get some of the key points across today, so we hope this is helpful to the viewers. So actually, on that note, a couple of weeks ago, I was on the previous webinar, so episode 3, with a senior manager on the mortgages side from the AIB, and I suppose most expats coming over either had property to sell or were looking to buy a property over here, and there was queries around renting as well. But for those who are, I suppose, relocating over, I suppose, that don't have the means to buy a house and might be coming into a lower paid level role and fall into the social welfare system as such, what's the situation then with housing, and how can expats access housing, social housing, when they return?
Yeah, that's the next step, and I suppose that will be the area that may cause the settlement, settling in to take a few months longer if you're in that position. You are entitled to apply to the local authority to register for the social housing list if you are in receipt of social welfare, or if you have a low income. So again, that's going to be means assessed. The local authorities, they're in every county or city council, and you can make an application to register to go on a waiting list for social housing. Obviously, social housing is massively, in demand, and the waiting lists are long term. So in the meantime and in the interim, we have a system where people can access a housing assistance payment. So when you are registered on the housing waiting list, and at the moment we're hearing in Dublin that it's taken up to 12 weeks for that application to be processed and you to register, at that point then you can apply for the housing assistance payment. And this operates in line with the private rented market. So you're looking for a property to rent within a rent limit set out by the housing assistance payment system for your family size, and you will ask a landlord to accept this payment, and you'll have a certain amount to pay or contribute to that rent. It's around €30 a week. And it's widely accepted in Dublin now, so I suppose that's quite a good positive thing to know. But if you're in a situation where you're returning to Ireland and this process takes at least 12 weeks, and we're talking about after you get a social welfare payment, or you're on a low income, this is where, as you say, it could take 2-3 months to get actually settled. So people, will want to make sure they have adequate funds to pay for accommodation up until they can access that payment. And again, a lot of people may have something set up, but it's good for people to know that these are safety nets for them. So if you're worried that you do have some savings, but if they're all going to go quite quickly, there is some supports there. And the longer you give yourself time to kind of set it all up when you're here and all that settlement, the less stressful it will be.
Okay, great. And, that's important to know. And I think especially for expats making the move here, we're in an uncertain world at the moment. Now, obviously, there's a major skills shortage in Ireland, and we do see a buoyant market well into the future for highly skilled workers. But, there is a possibility further down the road that someone does lose their job and, they've maybe made a big move from another part of the world. So it's important for them to see what type of structures are there if something like that does happen until the market bounces back again.
Absolutely.
So just actually one more question for you, and I'll take you out of the hot seat then at that stage, Danielle. What about healthcare? So, in terms of medical and GP care, what's on offer?
Yeah, well, hopefully there's some amazing offers for health insurance to be included in some of these jobs that people are going to get, which would be fantastic. We still have a bit of a two-tier system going on in Ireland, as you're probably all aware of. And until we have Sláinte Care, which is the big plan to bring in, free one-tier public health service in the next 10 years to Ireland, we're still operating on that. So shop around, there's a few companies now, if you want to invest in health insurance. The cost of GPs is still quite high. A visit is around €70 at the moment. Everyone's still paying for prescriptions. So it's still costly, and people are still reluctant to go to the GP for, minor things. I'm from the north, so that's bizarre to me to not to avoid going to the doctor when you need to. But yeah, hopefully it's on the way. In the meantime, if they've increased access to medical cards now for children, so children up to the age of 6 will have free medical care, which is fantastic. It went up from the age of 4 about 2 years ago, I think. And medical cards are now free for anyone over the age of 70. So medical card covers GP visits, inpatient and outpatient services, prescription, eye and ear tests, and dental costs. So it's everything. And then there is a GP visit card, which is different and will only cover the cost of a visit to the GP. And both of these you can apply for if you're on a low income or if you are in receipt of social welfare. And those applications normally take about 3 weeks. And at the moment, there's bound to be a backlog, so it could take a bit longer. But again, this can all be a bit fluid and changing over the next year if people are coming back next year. But the information on list of GPs who accept medical cards, not all GPs do, is on the hse.ie/medical cards page. So people can kind of get a little more insight there around which GPs are in the area that they're going to live, who will accept a medical card if you're going to apply for one. They'll need to sign a form, and you put in the application. It's quite straightforward and simple. And hopefully there are less delays, But if people are in need of some support, it's really important to get researching on that, finding out what needs they or the family have, and if you need any specific consultations or specific support around conditions, it's really good to probably check some private groups around that, and what their experience is, waiting times, if you're concerned about treatment and that. Not really our area, but it's so important to check all of that, because the level of care that you're getting in the country that you're staying in will vary, and may not be the same in Ireland. So that's another important thing to look into, if that's one of your concerns.
Definitely, yeah. It's another complex system, isn't it? So, I suppose we get asked many of these questions ourselves as recruiters when people are coming into the country or just moving jobs. So, how we'd summarise it is, look, we have a public healthcare system or hospital system that's free to everybody, technically speaking, And then the people who take on private healthcare, which an individual policy might cost 700 or 800 a year, up as far as even 14 or 1500. Family policy maybe between 1700 and 2500, or even up as far as 3000 a year. And that just gives, I suppose, access to more hospitals and more consultants and a speed of access to services. And we find that the vast majority, anyone who's kind of on the lower end of the market in terms of wage and earnings, would have a GP visit card or a medical card for as you mentioned, that GP service. So along with the free service to the over 70s and the under 60s, most people in the lower end of the bracket have free GPs. So I suppose the whole healthcare system is very heavily subsidised and far more accessible than some of our neighbours across the Atlantic and other places as well.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks again for that, Danielle. I'm going to move on to Richard, who's been very patient in the background there. So, hi Richard, how are you? Thanks for joining.
Good, thanks. That's great. No, delighted to let Danielle take the lead on all those questions. No problems at all.
She's done all the heavy lifting there, I think. Yeah. So, Richard, really what I'd like to know is, and there's a question in there on the forum already, and we'll come to a few more questions, I think, afterwards. But one of the questions was somebody relocating over with a spouse and a family, and they're an Unmarried national. So effectively, for somebody who's moving over with, as I said, a spouse that might be outside of the EU, what's the situation with that process and coming into the country and the right to work here, and what type of paperwork and all of that stuff needs to be organised?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different categories that come into play there. And the first major one is, are the couple married or are they partnered? And then the second question is, do they need a visa or do they not need a visa? So as you mentioned, it does relate to non-EU citizens. I mean, for EU citizens at the moment, that there are no immigration issues or barriers at all. They can just very easily enter the country. Very briefly, I'll mention that obviously the UK will unfortunately not be part of the EU quite soon. And in fact, there's going to be a pre-clearance system put in place from the end of this year or early next year. So back to the question mark of whether or not it's spouses or partners. Spouses can enter Ireland immediately if they don't need a visa. If they do need a visa, they have to apply for the visa. But all partners have to make a pre-clearance application. This is a relatively new system. And what a partner means in the context of the immigration system is someone you have been living with for 2 years or more. So there's a really strict cohabitation criteria that we've seen applied, as I say, quite strictly, with one or two notable exceptions. There will be an expectation that if you're to claim your de facto partners, which is basically saying you're as close to being married as being married, then you should be living together for 2 years. So there's a pre-clearance process for that. Takes about, well, back in January, it was taking about 8 to 10 weeks. The original processing time was suggested to be 6 months. Right at this moment in time, I just don't know. I can't say. It's not clear, and everything is changing in terms of how immigration applications are processed. But that is a great system in the sense that once that pre-clearance is issued, a lot of the work has been done. Because when the pre-clearance is assessed, then the person can enter Ireland and they can register with the immigration system and get to work quite quickly. And the same applies for spouses. So the visa and non-visa thing comes up again. If you get pre-clearance, you still might have to apply for a visa, but it'll be done very quickly because all the work has been done. If you're applying to come in as a spouse of an Irish citizen and you need a visa, so for example, if you're a Chinese national, you need a visa, or an Indian national. If you're Australian, you don't. If you're American, you don't. If you're Brazilian, you don't. There's a list of countries that require it and don't require it. The process, it's taking easily up to 6 months. So there's definitely preparation and stuff that needs to be thought about in advance. So the key things are, what is my category of relationship, married or civil partnered or not married? And then do I need a visa or not? And in both those cases, if you're looking at a pre-clearance application or a visa, you're looking at a waiting period. So then if someone enters the country, and they either have their pre-clearance or they have a visa or they're non-visa required and married, then they make an appointment to the registration office. And there's an office in Dublin that caters for the Dublin region, and that's done by online appointments. And then outside of Dublin, every county will have a Garda headquarters where there is an immigration officer. So in all these cases, you need to make an appointment to register. And at the moment, it is taking a few months. Prior to all this COVID stuff, people could possibly come in and get an appointment very quickly. But in this case, they can't. So you have to factor that in, because during that waiting period, the non-EU citizen doesn't have the legal right to work. They can go looking for work, they can volunteer, they can study, any of those things, but they can't take up paid employment. So, we've talked to people who've said, look, we're planning for a waiting period. So in that period of time, my husband or wife is going to, get the house sorted, concentrate on getting the kids into school and getting ourselves up and running, or they're going to take up a course or whatever it might be. So it's a really good idea to be really sure of exactly what criteria apply to your specific situation, and then make your plans around it. And this is something we deal a lot with. So we will be usually very informed about waiting periods and the procedures and things that are in place. It's just right now, a lot of the services in Ireland were closed, so there's backlogs. So this is something people do need to be aware of. Now, I noticed there was a question just briefly, because it is relevant about it. This is for someone who's hired as a critical skills permit. So I think this person is not Irish. But in that case, critical skills work permit holders are in a great position where they can apply immediately for pre-clearance for their spouse. So it takes about 2 months, maybe 3 months. So there's still preparation required, but for that very specific category of critical skills work permits, there's a great route to bring your family in with you. So I've talked a lot about just spouses and partners, basically on the assumption that if there is an Irish citizen in the mix, hopefully the children will also be Irish and therefore won't have to worry about any immigration processes. In the past, we've dealt with lots of people who've had kids born abroad. And not technically, they are Irish citizens, but they don't necessarily have the documents. Yeah. We'd always suggest try and get the passport before coming to Ireland. It's just going to make it easier. If your kids are non-visa required, let's say they're Australian passport holders, they'll get into the country, there's no issues, but they're still going to need to prove their Irish citizenship at some stage. So ideally, do as much as you can in advance. And that's really the key message. The immigration systems around the world are they're under pressure, and with the various lockdowns and different things in different countries, it's just a bit uncertain at the moment. But the important message is that there are routes out there, and as long as you plan for them and prepare for them to do that. So we've a lot of very specific information with regard to that. Also, Danielle earlier mentioned citizensinformation.ie, and it's good just to mention that they actually have a bespoke section for Irish immigrants returning to Ireland that was developed over the last year. And actually both that particular project and our project do this work with funding from the Department of Foreign Affairs Immigrant Support Program. So there's a good support network out there that's been funded by the government as well to try and help people come back, or at the very least help prepare them so they can come back with the best information possible.
Very good. And yeah, I've seen that actually on Citizens Information that it is a great source, and they're responsive as well for queries when you contact them as well around specific cases. There's just one thing you mentioned, Richard, that might worry a few people. That was a 6-month lead-in time. I presume that wasn't in relation to spouses, that was in relation to partners.
It's in relation to pre-clearance for partners, and it's in relation to visas for spouses. So I think the only people who have a really immediate and quick route into the country are non-visa required spouses. They're the ones who can just enter Ireland without having done any preparation in advance in terms of dealing with the immigration services. Everyone else, if they're a partner or if they're visa required, has to engage in advance of coming to the country. Okay. We'd certainly be suggesting 6 months as a fairly good average. just allowing for all the different things that can come into play and where someone is in the world and where their application is dealt with. Now, one thing I guess that is important to mention is that the couple do not have to enter at the same time. So you could have an Irish citizen who might come back, and their partner or visa required spouse could remain behind while the process is ongoing. So there isn't a requirement that they have to be traveling together. But if they want to travel together, then that paperwork has to be done first in order for them both to be able to enter Ireland and get in and get through the border controls.
Okay, so for those who are going to start their journey from a job hunting point of view, they should really start looking at that process now for bringing a partner over that is a non-Irish national.
Yeah, I think so, and I know that's a difficult scenario that's come up in a few cases. We've had a few people who've been offered great employment positions, and they've had to make a difficult call about, do they hang on and wait for something else, or do they take up the job and split the family up? I'd always say in these cases, there can be some discretion made in applications, and I don't want to put that out there as a guarantee to anyone, but if there are unique circumstances, people need to make their case really strongly, whether it's for a visa or a pre-clearance application. And certainly, if someone does have an assurance of a job and maybe either travels or is intending to travel, that's actually a really strong supporting factor in the immigration permission for their spouse, because then that provides a sort of security, I guess, that the people will be coming over and won't be immediately dependent on the state. And it is important just to mention this. It's not a deal breaker. People can still get permissions, but it's always a better position to be in if you can show a planned route and show that you'll be able to, you have a plan in place and a job to come to, and that just is always going to be helpful, So I don't want to say that to put people who are not in that position off, but to say it to people who are in that position, use it. It's a good thing to have.
Good, okay, great. So what I might do is I might just have a look at some of the questions that have come through there. I know, Richard, you've just tackled one of them. So bear with me now a second. Yeah, I see the query there about the traveling with an unmarried partner.
Yeah.
And
I will add to that there, just Eric. I mean, that in that case, if that person has been granted a critical skills permit, they'll get their visa, no problems for Ireland. The partner will have to make a pre-clearance application. They'll have to prove the length of their partnership, but they'll need to be together for 2 years,
Yeah, so that will be what bills in their name and maybe a tenancy agreement or something while they're living together abroad over the 2 years.
Yeah, and that's where the question asks about how to prove the relationship is genuine, and that's why with de facto partners cohabitation is such a strong thing, because it's I guess one of the easiest ways to prove that a relationship is genuine, and that's where if people are living similar to being married, they will probably have a joint lease. They might have a shared bank account, all that type of stuff. So these are things that can help prove the relationship. The official information is available as well through the immigration website, inis.gov.ie, and that does give some details as well about the process and the pre-clearance applications. There's an application form and a list of required documents. So it's fairly clear what's needed from people. And again, we're open to any queries if anyone needs extra information. And as well, just to mention, and I think this has been referenced before, some people might be in unique and difficult situations. And certainly in those cases, that's very much where we're geared up to help people. We can have confidential conversations and just really look at an individual situation. And what we'll do is just give the best advice for them. It may or may not be what they want to hear, but it'll definitely be exactly as we understand it and in their best interest to know so.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. A couple of queries in from Elaine. Is a medical card qualification means tested? And the medical card is, as far as I know.
Yeah, it is indeed, yeah.
And then she's actually said she's moving home in January, will be 6 months pregnant at that stage, and asking would she be eligible for a free medical card, a maternity card. prior to giving birth. So I presume, again, once means tested, if the means of, if I'm not sure if Elaine's traveling by herself, or if she's with family, if the partner is a high earner, then a medical card can be provided. But she'd still go into the public system free of charge into our system in order to.
And it's important to, Danielle will know this probably better than me, but it is important to make the distinction between access to social welfare and access to healthcare, because there's two questions there about healthcare, and healthcare is it's assessed in terms of access to the public system if you are what's known as ordinarily resident in Ireland, and anyone who's made a move to Ireland or has returned to Ireland will be considered ordinarily resident. So they should be able to access all those healthcare services. The maternity system is to a large extent free, and there might be some incidental costs through the public system. It's absolutely possible to access that. And I'm right in saying, Danielle, even that person coming back quite close to the end of their maternity should still be able to get access to maternity care in the hospitals?
Yeah, all maternity services are free, so there's no issue there. You don't need a medical card. It's just a free service for women in Ireland, so that won't be an issue.
Great. There's a couple of other queries in. One is on car insurance, and I would recommend there's plenty of brokers in Ireland, online brokers that can help out in terms of what's needed there.
I'll throw in something anecdotally. We know that there's a lot of people asking those questions, so we've heard anecdotally what happened, but there are a number of insurance companies who are offering to accept no claims. You do have to shop around, and there might be some private Facebook groups that will give you the names of some companies. But yeah, there are a few, and you need to shop around.
Okay, very good, thanks. Just a message in there. I'm not sure if you're seeing that, Richard.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, that's an interesting question. So technically, if you come into the country on a tourist visa, you're not supposed to change your permission or your status, and you're supposed to leave the country. However, in these cases, if someone is the spouse of an Irish citizen, then the family rights kind of trump the issue of whether or not you leave on the basis of having a tourist visa. The problem is, if they come in a tourist visa, they'll have to make a different type of application, and it will take up to 12 months to process, during which they won't have the right to work. So, sometimes people do find themselves in these really unique circumstances where they've just had to come back and they happen to have a tourist visa, and we'll help and support that. But it's going to be a long wait. If you can do it the correct route, which is applying for the right visa before, go for it, because it will mean everything's much quicker on this side. But like I said, people have unique circumstances. I'm certainly not going to judge how anyone has entered the country or otherwise. It's just that they need to be aware it's a bit more complicated and a bit longer.
Super. Question probably for you, Danielle. If you have any underlying condition with regular prescriptions, are you eligible to apply for a medical card on entering the country?
Yeah, again, it's going to be based on means and the cost of prescriptions. There is a claim back if your prescriptions amount to over a certain amount. I think it's around $250 a month. So you can kind of claim some costs. But if you are entitled to a medical card based on your means, you'll be exempt from prescription charges. So it's not necessarily down to what condition you have. It's just down to means.
Yeah, and there are a few. There is a scheme for a number of defined or specified conditions that you can apply for to get your prescription costs covered. I don't recall what they are. They're ones that have been agreed.
The drug payment scheme, I think, isn't it?
No, it's actually a different scheme. It's through the health service and not the social welfare as well. Okay. And it's particular, usually very long-term illnesses that are going to impact a person, possibly for the rest of their lives. So there is a route there, and the requirement then is the person is ordinarily resident in the country. So in that case, if it's an Irish citizen coming back, they've made the move, they're going to be residents, and that can be proved. And then if they meet the criteria for particular things, then yes, they could possibly get all those costs covered, or as Danielle said, under the medical card scheme.
Super. Query earlier on as well on the I know we covered PPS a little bit earlier, but there's some delays at the moment in getting PPSs on people entering the country. Do you Crosscare? Do you guys do anything to help expedite that, or is that a separate?
Yeah, we wish. Yeah, everyone's affected by that at the moment. I don't think it's possible to ask the department to expedite anything based on just the level of need anyway. Certainly, if there is an urgency, that you could state that in your application. We, in cases of very vulnerable people, we have advocated to get PPS, particularly if they're homeless or without an income, and that's where we do assist to try and push that. But if you're applying and it's urgent, just put that in your application.
Okay, very good. And one other query, somebody in the UK, they mentioned they can make voluntary contributions to a state pension. Does the same apply in Ireland? Is there some sort of advice available on what steps you need to take to do this whilst remaining overseas?
Yeah, I had a quick look at the great citizensinformation.ie when I saw that one coming in. Yes, there is. You can make voluntary contributions, and there are certain criteria and requirements. And actually on Citizens Information, there's a page called Voluntary Social Insurance Contributions. And that'll give you all the answers there. But there is a system in place. So if you fit the criteria, yeah, sure.
Super. Rahul has a recruitment related question about a visa being required. And I can answer that. And yes, I suppose if not an EU citizen, then a visa would be required to come into the country. And that's something maybe we might just address after this webinar directly. And one more in from Seth. I'm coming in as a spouse to a work permit holder. Can you take on a master's program? The immigration permissions that are granted to spouses or work permit holders, most of them will offer the person the right to work, but there's no restriction on studying. Now, there might be fees, there could be international fees, that's a different question, but certainly someone can study. And in fact, that just reminds me of another point, is that in some cases where, say, a spouse or a partner or someone maybe doesn't fit the 2 years cohabitation or is hitting some other barrier, because sometimes there can be a year wait for spouses or partners or work permit holders to come in, the student visa route is another option, and a legitimate one, because that's based on the individual coming to study here, paying fees for the course, and nearly all the courses in universities will be eligible for student visa. So if they already have their immigration, if Seth already has their immigration permission sorted, it'll be fine. Whatever you get on arrival will allow you to study if you want. If you haven't, then the study visa, which is entirely separate, could be a route to take as well. And then that just it brings you into a different part of the immigration system. But then once you're in it, there are always opportunities to apply to change permissions based on, say, a relationship. Okay, brilliant. And I just wanted to mention as well, we spoke about the critical skills gap a little bit earlier on, or critical skills list. I used to saying those words a lot. It's quite a broad list, actually, of professionals.
It is. Yeah, it's fairly broad. And the critical skills list is a really nice one, because if the role fits into that, it's an easier one to apply for. And the critical skills, the thing about the critical skills in the work permits is that they're always applied for by employer and employee at the same time. There's two people in that process, and the critical skills one is easier and quicker, and it gives more immediate rights to bring family into the country. But it's not the only one. There, if your job doesn't quite fit that, there are still work permit options. It's just that there could be a delay of up to 12 months before you can apply for family members. And then worth mentioning, it might not be particularly relevant for the people here, but there is also a list of jobs that you just cannot get a permit for. And that is one that is good to be aware of, because you'll probably know as well, Derek, like that, employers, depending if they're a big multinational, they're going to have no problems working through the employer permit system. If they're a relatively small company or not used to it, then they might get a little bit scare it off or not be clear about it. So, we'd often find that, with the big companies, there's just zero issues. They've probably got dedicated staff to deal with it. And then with some of the smaller ones, they say, oh, well, you have to be in Ireland. You have to have a visa to work here already. So, maybe that's a bit of a negotiation with potential employers. But certainly knowing what the job is and whether it fits the right list or the wrong list or the in-between list is super important, because then you know your options,
Okay. I think we'll post that critical skills link as well in a resign letter to people who joined us on Crowdcast over the last couple of episodes. So there's just a huge amount of information to take in. I'm aware of that today. So there's plenty of links we'll send on under each particular area. And there's one thing actually I think we might have missed out on, and that is the schooling system in Ireland.
Oh, yeah.
So with people coming over with a family, how does that work?
Well, if we're talking about children school age, the process is fairly straightforward. It will really depend on what time of the year, if you're coming back during term, or if it's in the summer. So I suppose essentially it's based on what area you're going to be living in. So you're going to be looking at schools close to where you're going to stay. And that might be unknown until you actually get a place to stay in Ireland, so that's going to be hard to plan ahead for. So I suppose the accommodation is the main point. So your address will be used in your application to a school. So generally what is recommended is that you apply to several schools in the area that will be close to the address that you're staying in. And if you're having any issues, there are liaison officers in the Department of Education that can help you if you're encountering difficulties. The school places are full and you need some extra help. We've had good experience there, and they do get a place for people if there's difficulty. But it'll take a few applications to different schools, and you're expected to apply for the ones closest to you. For childcare, that varies a lot. It's expensive. Really important to kind of get children registered on a waiting list, because there's quite a lot of waiting lists in childcare, and the options, and be prepared for the costs and do your research around that as well. Third level can be a little bit more complicated, depending on whether you're needing access to grants. So this can involve some assessment of residency, and we know that it can vary between different universities. We know that there was some kind of decision back a good few years ago about supporting returning immigrants and access to third level, but we know it's not very consistently applied. It may depend on the university as to whether you can access free fees or the grants. So again, look into that research and contact the offices directly in the different universities that you're applying to.
Great. So to summarize, childcare obviously for preschoolers expensive enough, 150 to 250 a week, even depending on the part of the country. Primary school and secondary school is free, basically. There aren't that many private schools in the country, so most people use the public system, and it's a very good system. And then obviously on the third level education, people on the lower level incomes can get free third level access, and those not will pay some form of fees, which are a lot less than those parts of the world. But again, that's something that you could check out through the Department of Education. So we're nearly at the end of the hour. I just wanted to say to the viewers that I think what Crosscare do, it's fantastic. It's a really great service, and it's worth logging on to migrantproject.ie. There's some blogs there in terms of, having a successful and a happy return to life back in Ireland, and there's different, I suppose, tips and more guides there. And they have a very engaging service as well if you're to contact them through the website or through the info at web address. And finally, I suppose I said thanks for everyone for joining us today. FRS Recruitment will send out an e-sign to our Crowdcast listeners after in the next couple of days, and you'll see, I suppose, anyone who might have missed part of this webinar. It will be on LinkedIn and through other social media channels, so you'll be able to catch up on anything you missed out on pass it on to any colleagues, any people are looking, any friends that are maybe looking to make a move over. And on the jobs front, please do feel free to log on to www.frsrecruitment.com to have a look at the jobs market in Ireland and engage with some of our recruiters who will help both with, I suppose, jobs information and also with tips around relocation. So thank you very much to both Richard and Danielle for joining me today. I found it really, I suppose it's very complex subject, but I found it great. I think there's really good tips there for people to get the ball rolling on their move home.
Yeah, you're very welcome, and thank you for having us. And people want to keep up to date on any information, just look at our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram accounts as well for regular updates.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.